What is up guys, my name is Cal and welcome to the channel. I'm currently on a quest in Maplestory to obtain the Chaos Rudibus set on all of my characters. The Chaos Rudibus set is a highly sought after set of equipment that players usually keep with them until the late game. And while I don't plan on bringing 40 plus characters to the late game, this set looks absolutely amazing and I want all of my characters to wear it. In these kinds of videos, you're gonna see me challenge the Chaos version of the Queen, the Clown, the Chicken, and the Serpents for tokens that can be exchanged for these pieces of gear. I'll be doing this solo on every character and I'll share my experience with you along the way. Be sure to check out the playlist in the description if you missed any parts to this series, but other than that, I hope you enjoy the show and let's jump straight into the action.
I hunger for battle!
So, Kaiser is a pretty cool class. They operate between a human form and a Dragonite form. The class itself isn't too complicated to play at all. For the burst, it's summon the summon, buff up, debuff the boss, and then go all in. I want to be in the Dragonite form for as long as possible because it increases all of my stats. Kaiser also gets the ability to teleport in this form, which I personally think is the best form of mobility in this game. Facing off with the Queen, I have two methods to deal with her dot. First is Ancestral Prominence, which has an invincibility frame, and second is Grand Armor, which lowered damage taken by 12%. It only lasts about 15 seconds, but hey, it's better than nothing. Something cool I learned about Kaiser is that they can ignore damage reflect when they are in their Dragonite form. This is great considering that I can now ignore the Queen when she's in her bubble form. My first death happened around 43%. I ended up sacrificing a life because 1, I want to get rid of the dots, and 2, I knew the zombification debuff was on its way. My hero's will skill was on cooldown, so I figured this was the best time to sack a life. I managed to get the boss down to 15% before dying to a combination of the fire dot and the zombification effect. At this point, my burst was coming up, so I simply waited for the right moment to burst down the Queen. Pierre was once again a pretty simple fight. Now, I'm sorry if I'm always glazing through this fight in particular on every character, but the reality is, this boss isn't really that difficult unless something went horribly wrong during the burst at the end. With that said, we move on to Von Bon. Considering how big Kaiser is in his Dragonite form, I find it hilarious that you can actually duck Von Bon's orbs with relative ease. Now, Von Bon did get me with a couple stomps, once around 65% and another around 28%, but all in all, this was a pretty cookie cutter fight. Real quick for the break, Kaiser will be the first class that I couldn't unlock the pocket slot for, as I've used up the ones in the event shop. Other than that, everything else is pretty standard. So for Chaos Vellum, this was not as easy as I thought it to be. For the first time, I couldn't rely on the teleport to get me out of every sticky situation. You see, Kaiser's teleport is extra long and not like the mage's at all. Because of this extra long range, it was harder to be precise on where I would end up, and for the most part, I was getting stunned from the falling rocks. Now, Kaiser does have a short dash, to which I started to use over the teleport. I found the dash to be way more consistent when it comes to dodging those tails. Now, my first death was because I couldn't see the ground indicators due to Kaiser having so many bright effects. For the second death, I dashed straight into a rock and died to a tail. The third death happened not long after that as some poison puddle dropped on my head. I managed to get Vellum down to 36% before dying once again to the poison puddles. At this point, the thought of not being able to clear was very well in my head. Unfortunately, as I managed to get Vellum all the way down to 19%, a falling rock suddenly appeared on top of my head, which stunned me long enough for a tail to wipe me out. Of course, I re-entered the fight not long after that. For this second attempt, I made it a point to utilize both the teleport and the dash. The teleport is to get as far away from Vellum as possible, while the dash is for precisely dodging the ground indicators. Now, I died pretty early on at 76%, but shook it off and managed to get the boss all the way down to 33%. Here, once again, Kaiser's effect blinded me, and I lost another life. At 9.5%, I ate another rock, which led to another death. By now, it wasn't as bad as the first attempt, but chain deaths could easily turn the tide of this fight. My burst was about to come up, so as always, I waited patiently for the right moment to strike. Not too long after that, I managed to defeat Chaos Vellum.
To the limit!
Alright, so, are you guys ready for the best blaster gameplay of all time? Nah, just kidding. What you're getting is actually the Temu Blaster. Actually, no, not even that. What you're getting is closer to the Dollar Tree Blaster at best, if I have to be honest. Now, jokes aside, I did look up on how to play Blaster, as this is one of those classes that I never really understood. Now, during my research, I learned about the no reload tech, as well as animation canceling. But in the midst of battle, I have completely forgotten all about those. In preparation for the Queen, I actually went into practice mode like twice to get a feel of how Blaster would play out, so if you guys want to count those as attempts, then by all means, go for it. Now, going into the real fight with the Queen, the game plan was to rely on my burst. I tried my best to execute at least one proper burst throughout this whole fight, but all in all, they all felt really scuffed. The one good thing about Blaster is that they are quite strong. Whenever the Queen summoned the mirror, I was able to easily take it out. Now, I noticed that Blaster doesn't have a lot of range, so for the most part, I was eating most of the swipes coming my way. Nevertheless, Blaster is also quite tanky, which lets me play more aggressively. This worked out pretty well, as it got the boss all the way down to 20%. Here, I decided to sacrifice a life to cleanse away the dot. Soon after, I managed to beat the Queen. Now, I had a doomer mentality going into Pierre. I was fully expecting him to split into two at the very end because I thought I would mess up the burst. What added to the doomer mentality was the first burst doing around 14% to the boss. However, to my surprise, I got pretty lucky with the hat pattern, as getting Pierre to 33% took around 3 minutes. What was even better was that immediately after that, he switched to the blue form while I had on the red hat, which primed him for a bind and burst combo. Now, this was such a scuff burst sequence, I basically pressed everything out of order and I got sealed in the middle of it, but by some miracle, I managed to utterly destroy Pierre's health bar before he could even split, making this a very unexpectedly clean run. Von was up next, and of course, I played for the burst while doing my best to dodge his attacks in between. He got me with a stomp around 43% and once more around 32%. At this point, my burst was doing roughly 16% to his HP bar, so it took a bit of time, but I managed to get him down to about 5%. Here, his knockback sends me flying towards a couple clocks, taking my life count to 2. At this point, my burst was coming up, so I took no chances. After a simple bind and carefully maneuvering away from all of the falling clocks, I managed to beat down Von Bon. This fight with Vellum was a nail biter. The first 60% of this fight was honestly really clean. I was actually ducking and dodging everything perfectly, believe it or not. It was after the first death that everything kinda came spiraling down. My first death was due to an untimely jump into a tail. About 20 seconds after that, I hesitated to move, in which case I got completely destroyed. Another 20 seconds later, a rock got me in the corner as a tail was coming up. This took my life count down to 2. Once again, 20 seconds later, I got hit with another tail. By this point, I had died 4 times in a span of about a minute. I had about 27% left to go, but I had all the doubts in the world playing in my head. Still, I did not give up. My one saving grace was the fact that I got the boss down to 40% without losing a single life, so I was confident that I can do it again. I began to avoid Vellum like the plague whenever it is throwing out poison puddles. I would only hit Vellum when it is chucking fireballs, and I would burst during the fire blast animation. By sticking to this principle, I somehow managed to actually defeat Chaos Vellum on the Blaster. It really goes to show that even though Blaster is a hard class to play, you can actually defeat these bosses playing very unoptimally.
My memories will keep me strong.
So, Arc is an overall pretty fun boster. They are very mobile, they have a really strong burst that makes you invincible for part of it, and they have great damage whenever they're in Spectre form. The non-Spectre form is pretty weak, I will say that. For the Queen, I had a fun time just zipping around all over the map. It was so fun that I actually attempted to dash through the Queen while she was sucking me in, which of course resulted in me dying. A little later down the line, I got hit with one too many hearts and died. It was fine though, because it cleansed away the dot. What was not fine was 10 seconds after that death. I got way too close to the Queen and died to a swipe. At this point, I did not want a repeat of what happened to the Blaster in Vellum, so I quit being reckless and focused up. Eventually, I managed to beat the Queen. I actually got really unlucky with Pierre because it took forever to get this boss to 33% and even longer to get the right hat and boss combination. After a very long time of waiting, he eventually switched to the form that I was looking for, and a simple burst took out this clown. Von Bon, on the other hand, was quite rough in the later portion of the fight. Arc having many dashes helped quite a bit with dodging orbs coming my way. It's those darn stomps that really hinders my performance. My first death was at 64%. It was the simple stomp that got me. I managed to get the boss down to around 25%, and here is where the death dominoes begins. First, Von Bon got me with another stomp, bringing my death count down to 3. A few seconds later, he got me with another one to take me down to 2 lives. I managed to get him all the way down to 1.4% before jumping straight into a clock. This was a scary moment because I had no bursts, and I'm in the weaker form, so any wrong movement here would have ended this run. But luckily, there were no clocks spawning on top of my head, which gave me a safe moment to finish off that 1%. So, with Ark having so many weird dashes, going into Chaos Vellum, I was pretty nervous of not being able to control where I would end up. However, I knew I had to use these dashes at some point because they are a big part of my damage. My solution for this was to use these dashes right as Vellum pops out of the ground. Typically speaking, Vellum would pop out of the ground and then the tail would start spawning. This little sequence here would give me that little bit of time to safely dash around. So my game plan between the bursts was to try to hit Vellum with as many of those dashes as possible. Turns out the plan worked out pretty well. It carried me all the way down to 60% before I lost a life. Corners are just the worst here, as something always goes wrong when I back myself up against the wall and have to move away. Unfortunately, I made the same mistake later on around 45%, which resulted in another death. Once again, the corners were not helping me out one bit this run, as here, while I was making my way to the safe spot, a rock stunned me right as I got there, to which Vellum pushed me right into the blast. Things were looking sketchy, but if I learned anything from my time with the blaster is that you don't give up till it's really over. With only 2 lives, I clenched up and proceeded with caution. At the very end here, it was so nerve-wracking that I actually messed up my burst. You can see that I was switching between forms here, but regardless, it was enough to take out Vellum.
Come, let's begin!
For anyone who plays League, Ilium has a pretty similar playstyle to the champion Orianna, in the sense that you need to be aware of where your ball is because that's where the majority of your damage comes from. I actually find this class really fun to play because of this ball management playstyle. This class is not really that complicated at all. Treat the ball as a target, shoot your ability towards it, and it'll do big damage. For the queen, I placed the ball directly over her, so no matter which side I was on, I would be able to hit the queen. Now, Ilium also has this flight mode called Wings of Glory, which is used for bursts, and it's actually fantastic. For starter, it lets you freely fly. It also increases your final damage and boss damage by a large amount. It gives you knockback resistance, and it's overall great for just dodging any sort of ground mechanics. Other than that, Ilium comes with a teleport for mobility, which is my all-time favorite form of movements in this game. I thought about sacking a life just to cleanse away the dots, but honestly, I don't know which skill was doing this, but for the most part, my Ilium was not taking that much damage from the dot, so I never really needed to cleanse it away in the first place. Now, I haven't had an easy fight with the queen in a very long time, so I'm happy to say that I actually beat the queen without losing a single life. For Pierre, it was a standard fight. I did learn something new though. The hat dropping from the ceiling can completely cancel out the flight form, so this was something that I needed to be aware of going into the burst at 33%. After a bit of waiting around, it was time for the burst. Since Ilium does not have a bind, I carefully kited Pierre around to eventually defeat this boss. Against Von Bon, the flight mode was great for dodging all of his attacks. Of course, the flight mode only lasted a couple seconds, so I still had to manually dodge for most of this fight. Unfortunately, my easy time on Ilium ended here, as Von Bon got in a couple good shots. At 48%, I got hit with a stomp. Around 34%, I played a little too close to him, got stunned, and immediately got hit by another stomp. Despite these 2 setbacks, I still had a pretty good run going, so after playing a bit more safely, I defeated Von Bon without losing any more lives. Now, Ilium is another class that I did not get the pocket slot for, but again, everything else is pretty standard. As for Chaos Vellum, this was a pretty long fight. Since I did not pick up the 5th job bind, I ended up missing a good portion of my burst because Vellum likes to move around. The solution to this was to burst whenever Vellum is chucking out fireballs. In between, I was using teleport to dodge the tails and I would reposition the ball. While in flight mode, I didn't think I could completely ignore the tails or falling rocks, but I didn't want to take any chances, so I just dodged like I usually would, but in the air. I managed to get Vellum all the way down to 11% before finally dropping a life. Here, I got stunned and then got hit with the old 1-2 combo. Since I was so close to the finish line, I was pretty confident that I wouldn't die again. However, that completely backfired on me. At 0.9%, I popped flight mode just to get ready to finish off Vellum, only to move straight into a tail coming out of the ground. At least this answered my question on whether or not you could dodge the tail in flight mode. Anyways, I quickly revived and took out that last bit of HP left on Vellum.